And so I thought I would give it a try and see what happened. And I would only run on academic achievement because I felt all of the social issues, they've been decided by the public. Academics is in everything we do, and so we don't need this. But it's obvious that they need it. We're moving 2,500 employees, and leftism is pretty well ingrained throughout our educational system, and not only in Chilliwack. It's scary because these kids growing up are going to be our doctors and our lawyers and our whatever. And to me, that just sends all the wrong messages. The child understands that he can rule the roost just by throwing a tantrum. The kids understand that there's no justice. The teacher understands that he or she is ruled by a little child. The root is the family, absolutely. The family is the most important element in a child's life. And there were no motions about academics.
The right things for your glory in Jesus' name.
Amen. Do you have any instructions for me?
Be yourself.
Okay, I'll try to do that. I can't really be somebody else.
It's conversational,
Yeah.
right? It's no pressure.
Yeah, I've seen your other stuff.
Yeah,
so.
if I'll send you a link beforehand, and if you want to take anything out, can you move the mic a little closer?
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I looked it up today, and the last time you came on the show was January of 2022, episode 9.
That's a long time ago.
Yeah.
3 or 4 years now.
Yeah, I had a big break in between,
Uh-huh.
and then I started back up again. So I appreciate you coming back on today.
And time has passed, man. That 4 years passed just like nothing.
That's right. Because I don't remember how much longer in January 22. How long had you not been an MLA anymore?
2 years.
2 years. Okay.
Almost 2 years. Yeah.
Okay. And then when did you become a school trustee?
Just a year ago.
Okay.
Like on March 1st.
What did you do in between?
I learned Greek.
Oh, wow.
I took courses at Regent College associated with UBC, and I learned Greek, and I translated the New Testament, and I finished like 2 months ago.
You translated the New Testament?
Yeah, it was a long and arduous process.
And what made you want to do that?
I wanted to see if I could get closer to Jesus, honestly.
Okay.
That maybe reading the words that were actually written by the apostles, and some who are not apostles, would bring me closer. Like you think of a photocopy, and you do a photocopy of a photocopy, and I would move one generation up in clarity. And, I'm not sure that I did in the end.
Okay.
It's just another language.
Okay.
And
how accurate would the translation be?
Our translations are very, very good.
Okay.
Yes, there's not a lot of exception. I can take exception. Like I have a few ideas about a few things,
Yeah.
but I can't be an authority at my level.
Yeah.
I'm not a fluent reader by any means.
Okay.
There are 5,000 unique words in the New Testament, and probably I know 2,000. There are at least 1,500 that only occur once, that you'll only ever see once. So, yeah. But it was a wonderful exercise, and I enjoyed it hugely, and I'm still working on it and different aspects of it.
And what English translation do you prefer?
I prefer the NASB, New
Okay.
American Standard, because it's quite close to the literal, but every translation takes some kind of liberty, because you can't translate it directly. The syntax just wouldn't work out in English.
Okay.
So you have to rearrange words and everything. And Greek words are scattered throughout the whole sentence. Here it's in English it's subject, verb, object. I did this. And in Greek, it's not like that. You have to sort of gather the pieces together from all over the sentence. So anyway, it's very complicated and a wonderful study.
Very interesting. So NASB, why prefer that over the ESV or the King James Version? Or
it just sticks more closer to the syntax of the Greek.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Not that much closer, and I found that it too takes liberties.
Yeah.
Every translation is
Still a
bit of an
translation.
interpretation. Yeah.
And you said you're not sure if you got closer to Christ in the process. I mean, you're reading the Bible that much. Like, how much of it is?
It's a grammatical exercise when you're doing translation. It's not necessarily a spiritual exercise. So I'm reading it now more as a spiritual thing every day, and I find that to be rewarding. There are some things that stand out to you, like you might say, be fervent in spirit. The word is boiling in spirit, like water is boiling. And so that, it brings out a picture in
Yeah.
your mind, and that's helpful.
Yeah, that is helpful.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So you're studying Greek, and then you decide I want to run for the school board again, of the local school board here.
Yeah, well, Heather Moss resigned, and
Yeah.
I thought, really, there needs to be a social conservative in her place. And so I thought I would give it a try and see what happened. And I would only run on academic achievement because I felt all of the social issues, they've been decided by the public. And there's been a majority of 5 against 2 for a long time. And so I wasn't going to change any minds. I wasn't going to change any policy on that. But perhaps I could make a difference in academic achievement. And so I ran on that alone and said that I would add a value to the 5 existing values of the board and add academic achievement, and was not able to do that. They voted it down.
Voted what down specifically?
I wanted to add academic achievement as a value, a core value of the district, and they voted that down. I couldn't believe it.
Okay. And did they say why?
They said it was unnecessary. They said, academics is in everything we do, and so we don't need this. But it's obvious that they need it because their performance is so low. I mean, the children, I can tell you stories that children are not learning to read. The ministry or district officials came to us and said, we've decided in middle school that we're going to change our slogan from reading to learn to learning to read. And I said, why is that? Is that because kids coming into middle school can't read? And they said, oh, no, it's not because of that. They spent 5 minutes explaining why what they just said wasn't true. And I've heard other stories that suggest that kids do not know how to read when they get to middle school. And middle school is grade 6.
Crazy.
And it's, yeah. There was a teacher who came to us who was a math teacher. And in conversation about something else, she said, I have to treat my middle school kids as babyish. And she used that word because they don't know their 10 times tables. 10 times 1? Like, it's scary. These kids are in grade 6.
So the other members of the school board must hear these same conversations?
It just seems to go over their head. It doesn't concern them, it seems.
And do you have one-on-one conversations with your colleagues and kind of try to converse with people that way? And
they were not very open to one-on-one conversations, no.
Really?
There was 1 or 2 of them that would be, but no, most of the dialogue took place across the board table, and sometimes it was very unkind.
Okay.
And kindness is one of the core values of the district. But to their own, and I, as a Christian, I determined that I would not answer in kind. I would not answer when they said something nasty to me. One person called me arrogant, one person said I was racist, and so on. And I determined that I would never respond in kind, and I didn't. And I just held my tongue and just kept quiet and just made my arguments on, a logical basis. And
because I know, I think it's Karen Bonar, who would probably be the most left-leaning person on the school board, made some comments about you after you resigned recently from the school board, which we'll get to, that she said she appreciated you. And that some kind words to say.
And in fact, several of them made comments that said that I was respectful, including the trans member on the board, which I appreciated, and I got along with that person, and said that Terry was sorry that I left, and so I appreciated that at least I was able to make that personal connection in a kind way.
But they wouldn't meet one-on-one.
But I didn't ask for one-on-one coffees with them, but some of them didn't want to say hi to me. And so probably they would not have greeted that with great joy.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
So in your year that you spent on the board, do you feel like it was worth it? Did you get something done? Did you feel like you have a...
I think I got people talking among ministry staff more about academics. But to say I made a real significant change, I don't think I did. I was resisted at every turn by others on the board, by the majority on the board.
And do you think you were resisted because you were Laurie Throness and there's a history of your political values that you've stood for historically here in Chilliwack?
I've been in politics since the mid-'80s, in Chilliwack. And there's always been a hard core of leftism in Chilliwack, centered around UFE, or Fraser Valley College at the time. And there's still that hardcore, only it's larger today.
Hmm.
The union is a center of activism, and yeah, they're and they're able to call out the troops and vote, and I think the world has changed as well. I think Chilliwack has changed some. So
It's doubled in size since
doubled in
in the mid
size.
'90s when I came here.
Yes,
So
yes, and so I'm not sure I made a huge change. It's a bit discouraging to say that, but maybe in 1 year it could not be expected that I would make a huge change. I'm not
it's pretty
sure.
rare in politics to make any change in general.
It's
So
true. It's true. Because you're not just moving 5 people across the board table. You're moving 2,500 employees.
yeah,
And leftism is pretty well ingrained throughout our educational system, and not only in Chilliwack, but in BC and in Canada and in North America. You see the same complaints popping up all over the place. And for instance, I went to the BC STA meeting last year, the BC School Trustees Association, which is all the trustees in BC. And it went on the Saturday where they consider all their motions from different boards around the province. And there were no motions about academics. It was all, it wasn't about ABC, it was about XYZ. It was about everything but. And I was kind of shocked at that there seems to be not.
Academic issues aren't just here in School District 33 in Chilliwack. It's all across the board.
It is across the board, because there is a philosophy, sort of a leftist philosophy, that pervades education, not only here in Canada, but in North America. And much of the ideology that comes to Canada comes from the States, from places like San Francisco and progressive areas like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this must be a cultural issue as well, because if there's parents that their kids are coming home in grade 6 and they can't read yet, you think that's a red flag for parents. But if it's as pervasive as you're saying it is, then it must also be a reflection of the parents of kids, that they're somewhat okay with the education level that their kids are coming home with.
Yes. So the last year, the district embarked on a huge strategic review exercise, and they got about 8,500 comments, including comments from parents. And so I went over all the comments, and I found that about 16% of them were specifically concerned about academics. One board member said, "Oh, that's just cherry picking." That's not cherry picking. That's statistically significant. But it does mean that 84% are to some level okay with what's going on. And probably of those 84%, a number would be concerned about academics too if they were pressed on it. But 16% said this is the top issue. This is a big deal. And so I brought 30 pages of comments that I took out and sent to all board members, and it didn't seem to faze anybody.
Okay. And do you know where Canada is in its education levels compared to other countries in the Western world? And
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I think I've heard a rumor that it's low on the scale. I had a teacher come to me and say that I think he's a middle school teacher, that he had a student from the Ukraine and who had just newly immigrated because of the war, and he was acing all the tests because they had done all that stuff 2 years ago in the Ukraine.
Yeah. I mean, that's been like that for a long time already, because I immigrated from Holland when I was 5, and so I've been in contact with my cousins over the years, and their educational system is definitely at a completely different level than we're at here.
Is that right, eh?
Yeah, like years ahead. Yeah.
It's scary. It's scary because these kids growing up are going to be our doctors and our lawyers and our whatever.
Well, they're not going to be able to become doctors, are they?
Well,
unless you change the levels for that as well. I mean,
well, in attending graduations, though, I did find that there are high achievers everywhere. So you'll find that there is a top echelon of high achievers, and then there's a bottom echelon of people who are very low, and then a whole bunch in the middle. And really, it's not the high achievers I worry about. It is the ones in the middle, the average person. Yeah. And I think the average person is declining in proficiency.
Along with the middle class.
Along with the middle class, maybe. I talked to one student in one of the high schools in our area, and he was in an advanced chemistry program, and he said, there are 3 of us in that program. It's a big school. And I think, where are our top chemists going to come from in the future? This is scary.
It's also what I think the society values. I mean, if you look what's on YouTube or social media in the feeds, you're getting what you want, and it's promoting anything but education, right? It's promoting becoming an athlete or an influencer
Influencer.
or whatever those things are. It's not usually promoting anything that's good, which ironically is so much different than like TikTok in China, which bans that kind of stuff and only allows educational stuff
Yes.
to come across the feeds of these
Yes.
kids. Well, like that's
Yes.
this is a highly secular government in China, communist government, and they actually are taking better care of their kids in that way.
I do want to say, though, and hand it to teachers and principals, that they are receiving kids from homes that are severely compromised. So one principal said that we're receiving kids in kindergarten that can't talk very well. Why? Because they're on screens all the time and they don't have a lot of conversation at home. And they have kids of homeless parents and kids of with all kinds of problems. And so they said, we're not trained as psychologists and doctors, we're teachers, but yet we have to deal with all these social problems that kids are coming to school with. And so, I understand that, and we have to cut them slack for that and see them as kind of heroic in some ways. I toured a school. I'll tell you one story. I toured a school. It was an elementary school, and went into this class, and the lights were out in the class. I met the teacher, and very friendly. And the teacher, I said, "Why are the lights out?" "Well, we're just trying to settle things down a bit." And then I noticed a kid in the middle, and he's yowling and reaching and struggling with an education assistant who's sitting beside him trying to shush the kid, and very disruptive. And the teacher said, "This goes on all day." And I think it's very sad for that kid to be shushed all day. The education system is trying to wrangle him all day, and that can't be very fun. And the rest of the class has to deal with this. How do they learn anything? It's very difficult. I toured with another principal, another elementary school, and I said, "What happens if a child sort of loses it?" And he said, "We have a policy of classroom clearing, where we'll clear the classroom and everybody will walk around in the halls, and they'll just wait for this kid to subside in anger, and then we'll go back into the class and start the class again." And to me, that just sends all the wrong messages. The child understands that he can rule the roost just by throwing a tantrum. The kids understand that there's no justice. The teacher understands that he or she is ruled by a little child and can't impart information, really. I'm sure the rest of the day is wrecked after something like that. But a teacher from Abbotsford told me that the same thing happens there. This is a practice, I think, across our schools, that a kid will throw a tantrum, they'll clear the class, he'll snatch stuff off the walls, he'll overturn desks, and basically wreck the place. And then you have to repair all that and then try and teach. This is very tough for teachers. So I understand they're in a difficult position.
Very difficult, yeah.
And we have to...
Have you talked to teachers that have been tenured for 20, 30 years and have seen a big shift then in the amount of kids that are coming in and the issues?
They say that in every school I toured, it would be a universal statement. We're receiving kids who are far less competent socially than they used to. However, when I would tour classrooms, they seemed like classrooms that I would be in as a child. Kids are rambunctious. Out in the playground, kids are running around, they're falling down, they're, crying and getting up. And
well, it's not the kids that are the issue, it's the environment that they're growing up in that's causing them to show up that way.
Yes.
I mean, we can't blame a kid for being a kid.
No. And a child is only a grade 4 child. You can't blame that. Like a grade 4 is only a small child. You can't blame that child if that child doesn't learn to read. He's only a little child. I think probably there needs to be a more regimented regime in grades 1 to 4, so that you discipline them earlier to be quiet and to listen to the teacher and to follow instruction and follow a schedule and things like that. I think things are pretty loose now. If you want to, anytime you want to get up and go out of the class, you can wander around in the halls or whatever. And I think things are pretty loose in structure. And I think probably the school system needs to be more structured in the earlier grades, so that by the time they get to grade 6, 7, 8, they're used to the routines of a more disciplined classroom.
So I think, I mean, and this issue, it comes down to, I think, the root of like the breakdown of the family and just the values of society as a whole, right? Because it's not, you don't just see the problems here in school, but you see it in the homelessness issues, or you see it in,
Mm-hmm.
all the different things that
Mm-hmm.
are happening in society
Mm-hmm.
right now. It's like we're trying to put band-aids on stuff
Mm-hmm.
when I think it's actually the root isn't being dealt with. Would
Mm-hmm.
you agree with that?
The root is the family. Absolutely. The family is the most important element in a child's life. And uh, that influence will project onto every stage,
Hmm.
whether it be the school or playground or whatever.
Hmm.
And so it's a worry, it's a concern, and it
Hmm.
should be for all of us.
Yeah. Only, I think the silver lining somewhat is what we've seen in the last election, how many more young people voted conservative than the boomers did,
Yes,
and that they're seeing, hey, what you the boomers have been pushing is
yes,
not helping, right? Like
yes,
it's they've gone against everything that's, and breaking it apart. And
yes,
I even see it in the circles that I'm mainly in, is that like there's a even a higher value on family than, the the older people, which valued work more,
hmm
and just getting ahead.
and yeah, it's a different culture, and the baby boomers sort of threw over the traces of their parents, and it seems that every young generation does that. Maybe the newest generation is throwing over the bad traces and saying, "Hey, we need to get down to brass tacks again, and raise a proper family."
Yeah, yeah. I want to move on to why you chose to step down from the school board after a year. What was your reasoning for that?
Sure, I did it both as a protest and a protection. On February 10th, there was a massacre in Tumbler Ridge. I wanted to say something about that, but you had to give it a few days. You can't do it immediately at the time. But as a school trustee, I felt a responsibility to respond to that in some way. Then on the 17th, 1 week later, came out the judgment against Barry Neufeld, $750,000 plus interest,
And
which
Barry Neufeld was a former
he
school
was a former
trustee
school trustee for decades
on the same board that you
on the
sat.
same board. And yes, he didn't run again. And but somebody laid a complaint against him, a human rights complaint, and he was convicted, if you can use that word. I don't think you used that word with the Human Rights Tribunal, but he posted 30 Facebook posts that were found to have breached the Human Rights Code, and so they assessed him a fine of $750,000, which is an unbelievable amount of money. When I first saw that, I thought, well, that can't be true.
It's like 10,000 American.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I don't think Barry even makes 30,000 a year. The interest on that.
yeah.
But it's 750,000 plus interest. And so I thought I should read this judgment. And a cold chill went up and down my spine when I read that, because I thought, I have said many of the things that Barry has said in a different tone, and not all of the things, but some of the things that Barry said, I said in the legislature, because I made 4 speeches in the legislature on gender issues. And someone could point to that. So I have a past. If I were to make a remark that upsets somebody in the district, and again, there are 2,500 employees in the district, the bar is low for discrimination in the place of employment. And as a school trustee, you are an employer. And so if I said something that offended somebody or made someone feel uncomfortable, they could make a complaint, and with the precedent that has been set, and with the current climate of political opinion, I could go through a 2-year ordeal like Barry did and be assessed a larger fine, because they would think Throness can afford it, maybe more than Barry. And so we're going to really teach him a lesson. And then I could lose basically everything. And so I really had to sit back and say, am I willing to undergo that? And so I felt, I want to say something. I'm going to say something about Tumbler Ridge, because somebody needs to say something. It's my responsibility to do that. But I need to separate myself from the workplace in order to do that, so that I can't cause discrimination in the workplace, which is one of the grounds on which Barry Neufeld was cited.
Yeah.
So I handed in my resignation after a lot of thought and sleepless nights, and it was a very difficult thing to do. The easy thing to do would be to say nothing and collect my check. and because I had not engaged at all on social issues. I had engaged only on academics, really. I made a few comments here and there, but nothing that ever came out in the press or anything like that. I just decided I wasn't going to fight those battles. Those battles have been fought and won and lost. So, so I felt I had to say something about SOGI and the obvious thing about SOGI. And so I handed in my resignation, and the superintendent didn't want to accept it. He felt I had been somewhat effective in pushing academics, which is needed in the district. But I just felt that I was in grave jeopardy, honestly, that if I said what I felt I needed to say, that I could lose everything. And if it were about my faith, I would die. But if it's about a pronoun, I don't know if I'm willing to sacrifice everything for that. And so I made my statement. I sent a press release. I made my statement. It resulted in a few stories around the province and one story in the National Post. And then the waters sort of close over you. You make a ripple in life, but the ripples go away pretty quickly.
Especially here in Canada, which just puts. I
Yes.
mean, you did a great interview with Jonathan Vermeeren on the Bridgehead, and talked more about just like the media in Canada. If anybody wants to check that out, but what would you say to someone else that's considering running for the school
Yes.
board now? Would you
Yes.
would you say, hey, if you believe these things, you probably shouldn't?
No, and I would say you should. And I would say I'm different because I have a past. As I said, I made 4 speeches in the legislature. I was vilified for it, and I lost my seat because of it, in large measure. And so if a person wants to run today, I think they need to be bold. They need to be careful in their speech, but they need to be there. And the reason is that in politics, and I've learned this over many years, the landscape is always changing. It's always undulating. We always think all things being equal, projecting into the future. All things are never equal in politics. Conversations are always changing. Trends are changing. Minds are changing. Thoughts are changing. And so people of conservative persuasion, social conservative persuasion, need to be there at that time, so that when the opportunity comes and the conversation changes, they will be there to guide in a positive direction for kids and for disabled kids and for gender-sensitive kids or gender dysphoric kids. We need to think of everybody and accept everybody. And I've always said this, that we need to accept kids just the way they are. The question is, how they perceive themselves. The question is, what do we teach kids about themselves and about their bodies?
Yeah.
And that to me is the rub of the issue.
Okay, so to clarify then, because you had a whole bunch of content that's publicly available already online because of your previous career as an MLA in the BC legislature, you felt that because of that reason you were in jeopardy.
I was especially vulnerable to a complaint to
So
the
if
Human Rights Commission.
If someone would have ran that had no history and is on the board now and then made their comments about Tumbler Ridge, for example, that I want to get to, what they would still be at the risk of the tribunal coming after them then, right?
Well, the tribunal in its 143-page judgment for Barry Neufeld said that there is still freedom of speech and you can oppose SOGI and so on if you want. You just can't be hateful or discriminatory in the way you do that. But, you have to be the 3 people who were deciding that case were legal experts, lifetime legal experts. People on school boards are not legal experts. And so they're going to not know just when their speech might become discriminatory or hateful or judged by those people to be discriminatory or hateful. That means in the face of a $750,000 slapdown, they're going to be totally silent. And so that $750,000 judgment, which I think was an injustice against Barry Neufeld, shut down free speech across the province totally, among school board members for sure.
Okay, so you are saying then, even though you believe other people should run, that they're going to be in the same predicament?
They would have to be very careful in what they spoke and in what they said. And maybe even, and I don't know if this is possible, but to run it by the tribunal first to find out, is this an acceptable thing? I don't know. Or get good legal advice, perhaps. But I think people in the future have to be very careful because the tribunal laid down as a baseline all of the things that conservatives, social conservatives, do not believe. So they laid down as a baseline that there is no connection between biology and gender. They laid down as a baseline that to misgender someone is to discriminate against them. They laid down the baseline that you cannot erase somebody by speaking badly about their transition or something like that. And so I think people have to be very careful in their speech today. And you just look at Bill C-9 in the federal government, where some portions of the Bible can now be seen as hate speech. You can see the direction, the way things are going. And that's a scary thing. The encouraging feeling that I have from the BC Conservative race that's ongoing now in this province is that some people have pledged to make changes to curriculum and so on to loosen up free speech. And so I think that's a positive development. And as I said, the political landscape is always undulating. It's always changing. So in the next government, I expect there will be a huge desire for change from the NDP, and we might have a different government, a more conservative government that will be influenced more by social conservatives, where there will be that freedom to speak.
Yeah. So you talk about the tribunal having this power because you're technically an employer and it's going to be discriminatory. What about if you were an MLA or if you're in the position I am here as like a public podcast host? If I make those same comments, can I be charged by that same tribunal, or can a political figure, or is this specifically just as the employer side?
Well, an MLA is speaking in the legislature, and the legislature is a constitutionally protected body because it's not created by statute. It's created by the Constitution. And so speech within the legislature is constitutionally protected. An MLA that's speaking outside the legislature still has to be kind of wary, but I think the tribunal would be loath to bring a complaint against an MLA. For a private individual, who is not an employer, there still is the possibility of creating discrimination against people or speaking hate speech against people. And so I think even you, Kyle, have to be careful in what you say. And I think it matters, and it would be really instructive to read the judgment, because it is very closely reasoned. And so you would know better where you stood if you read that. But I think a lot of it is in tone. You have to adopt a tone. And I think tone in politics matters as much as content. And so
tone as in how you say something.
Yeah, it matters just as much as what you say. And so if you're going to say nasty things about people and
yeah, I'm curious if you would have said everything that Barry had said in content, but in the way that, with the heart of kindness that I believe you have from what I know about you. I mean, I don't know you that well.
I took great pains to do that.
Yeah.
To speak in kindness. I absolutely did.
There would probably be a difference. Like I know when Barry was doing the speeches that he did, I mean, he didn't come across always in the greatest way.
Barry lacks filters. Barry is an ebullient personality, and he's getting older. We will all lack filters as we get older, and he did not hold back in anything he said. But he said some things in context that I would not have said. For instance, he said that there was a conspiracy to groom children and so on, and I don't believe that. I believe that the LGBTQ plus movement is a movement. It's not a conspiracy. There's no, one person directing it from some throne somewhere.
Yeah.
It is a movement. It's a social movement that runs along the river of society, and there's many influences on that. And that will change in the future. Just as I think, everything in the 80s and 90s was about lesbians and gays, and it isn't anymore. Today it's about trans.
Yeah.
It's not.
But it seems like the issues keep getting more extreme, no? Like, I mean, it's not about gays and lesbians anymore because it's fully accepted here in Canada as the norm, basically.
It is. But it's generational. And I wonder if there will be in the future as many people who identify in that way as there will be in the past. There is some social, if you like, social contagion here. I talked to a grandpa whose grandson was in high school in Chilliwack and said that every girl in that class identified as bisexual. Are they all bisexual? I don't think so.
Hmm.
I don't think so. I think it's a trend. It's a social trend. And you see this, I think, with trans to some extent as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Shows you the power of the media.
It really does.
Do you think that there's a misalignment among parents of what they think their kids are being taught versus what's actually being taught?
There is a policy of not disclosing to parents when a child decides to transition. And I don't think there's a lot of disclosure about what is taught in the classroom. Mind you, SOGI is not part of the provincial curriculum. It is a learning resource for teachers, and teachers have sovereignty in the classroom, and there was a Supreme Court decision that gave them that. And so a teacher can choose whether or not to teach that program in their class. They're encouraged to do so. There's supposed to be a SOGI lead in every school that will go around to teachers and say, hey, can I teach SOGI in your class? Will you give me time? And things like that. But there are some, I saw a news story in Abbotsford where the chair of the school board said that not many teachers use SOGI in Abbotsford. And so it's up to teachers to decide what they ought to do. And that to me is kind of encouragement. So when something like Tumbler Ridge happens, a teacher might say, I'm a little bit worried about SOGI's impact, and maybe I won't teach that this semester. Or maybe I'll teach parts of it, and maybe I'll just concentrate on anti-bullying or something like that, which I would certainly agree with. And so things happen in a subterranean way. It's not always according to law. But certainly because of Tumbler Ridge, there will be calls for more SOGI, because the left always doubles down. The left never backs off. If there are thousands of people dying of drug overdoses, what is the answer to that? It's more drugs. Safer drugs, free drugs, prescription quality drugs, drugs at any time. And then thousands continue to die. And the same thing is going to continue with SOGI. Once the coroner's report is through, and I hope they have an inquiry, probably there will be calls for more SOGI, mandatory SOGI, SOGI in every classroom, in every discipline, at every grade. I can see that happening, because that's always the answer of the left. It's never to reverse course, never to reconsider, never to think, maybe we're making a mistake. Maybe we ought to back off here. It doesn't go that way.
It makes me think of the verse, we don't fight against people, but against principalities and powers and of the unseen world. There's got to be a level of like demonic involved here, because rationally, even someone that doesn't have, the basis of Christianity can see that, these aren't long-term helpful things.
Like you would think if there was a chemistry program across BC, an advanced chemistry program that resulted in a high school explosion that resulted in 9 deaths, what would happen to that program? It would be immediately suspended until there was a searching inquiry to find out if it was just a student error or if the program had something to do with it. Not so with gender. Gender gets a pass on everything. There's no sober second thought or abundance of caution when it comes to, it's just full pell-mell on. And I don't really understand that. There is an impulse behind that.
I don't know if you're a student of history or not, but and I know a little bit about the fact that throughout history, that when kingdoms came and went, that usually at the peak of their power or on the decline, that usually it's the sexual revolution that kind of is a sign that it's dying. If you look at Rome and all the stuff that happened there, it was like when all this the sexual revolution stuff started happening, that's really when stuff started going south. Do you think this is just kind of where we are as a society in the Western world, that this is a result of we did not having as the major problems that other societies have, like in Africa, they're thinking about, well, what are we gonna have for dinner? And because of the the affluence we've had or whatever it is, that this is just we're just on this part of the wave.
There's an S curve with every society, that there is an apex to that society. So I was just in Paris. I came back from a little holiday, and it's clear when you walk through Paris that the height of the French Empire was 150 years ago. And And the same is true. I used to live in England for a while. In London, it's also true. All the massive buildings and everything. When you look, it's clear that the Victorian era was the high point of English society, and it is in a state of decline from there. And I think it's true with Western society in general. And you see that across the board. You see it. You see it in our schools. You see it demographically. You see it in the family. You see it, and perhaps the sexual revolution is part of that too. That accelerates that decline, because it certainly breaks up that unit of strength in society, which is the family.
What did you want to say about Tumbler Ridge? So that was the shooting that happened here in northern BC.
Yeah, that was where a young trans person exploded in rage and shot 8 people, and then shot him or herself. I'm not sure how to term that person. And what I wanted to say that SOGI needs to be suspended across BC until an inquiry is done.
So how do you associate SOGI with that?
Well, SOGI is the teaching. In my mind, I've been through the lessons in SOGI. That's all online, and it's clearly a teaching tool to encourage children to question their own identity, and it is the only teaching tool that is available that does that. And so this child questioned, when he was a young boy, he questioned his identity. And I don't know if SOGI impacted that child at all, but I think we need to find that out and find out just what impact that program may have had on that child, and maybe having on other children. There needs to be a focus there. Of course, that's not going to happen. And I knew that wasn't going to happen, but I knew that somebody had to say something and that I would have to pay a price to say it. And so I said it.
The BC Conservative Party right now seems to be split between moderates and the social conservatives. And can those groups actually work together? You have history in this, or is that just a marriage already sleeping in separate bedrooms?
Well, the Social Credit Party, and then the BC Liberal Party, and now the Conservative Party is a marriage of convenience of social liberals and social conservatives. On the financial aspects, everybody is united. There's no discord there within the Conservative Party. But within the center-right, there has always been a split between social conservatives and social liberals. But they get together because if they're not together, then the NDP win. And so there's always been a rule that you could say whatever you wanted in the BC Liberal Party, but you had to tell everybody ahead of time what you were going to say. And then there would be meetings, and there would be, discussions in caucus and things like that about what you would say. And I think that's very healthy. But we will need to have a leader coming up who is tall enough to straddle that divide. And that divide is growing. It didn't used to be so wide, but it is growing. And there needs to be a leader who can embrace both sides. And two of the leadership contestants, Carrie Lynn Findlay and Yuri Fulmer, reached out to me and had a conversation with me, and I so appreciated that. And I told them both the same thing. I said, your job as a leader, if you win over the next 4 years, is not policy. That's secondary, important, but secondary. Of primary importance is unity. You have to do whatever you need to do to get everybody in the tent. Because in 2017, over 2 million votes, there was 1,000 votes between the NDP and the BC Liberals. 1,000 votes. That is a razor-thin majority of a razor-thin majority. It's an amazingly close vote. And we lost one riding in Comox by 189 votes, and that decided the government. That we would have had a BC Liberal government if 189 people would have made a different decision in that election. That means unity is priceless. Unity is everything. And in the 2024 election, where the BC Conservatives almost won within a seat or two, they were united. And that because the BC Liberals bowed out. And I think that was very big and an excellent decision and very wise of Kevin Falcon to do that so that the right could be united. And now the right is disunited, and that is the killer. And that will give us another NDP government. So whoever the new leader is has to unify the party through, embrace through threats, through cajoling, through reasoning, through whatever it takes, twist themselves into a policy pretzel. That's fine. Everybody has to be in the tent. And that is the number one and perhaps the only job of a new leader. And I impressed upon them both. And I saw that Yuri Fulmer has made a deal with 1BC, with Dallas Brody, to bring her back into the fold. And I think that's great. Now he just has to make a deal with the others who are outside.
Okay. Who do you support in their race?
I've not thrown my support behind anybody. I'm still looking. We have until May 30th. And I'm looking at what people say.
I ran into Ian Black the other day, who's running. What I liked about the very, very little I know about him is that he's been in the private sector for a while. I think he was an MLA up until 2011, and now he's been running just private companies and tech companies, trying to turn them around. Would you know him well? And
I don't know Ian Black at all. I became an MLA in 2013, so I'd never met him actually. But and I had only met Carrie Lynn Finley for the first time, and Yuri Fulmer for the first time when I spoke to them recently. Yeah.
What do you say to someone that's thinking about going into politics? Or what would you say to someone like me, a younger conservative guy that sees what's going on, and it's just like, well, someone might have to step up. What advice would you give?
Absolutely, get into politics. When I was wondering what I wanted to do with my life, I watched an interview with Diefenbaker on TV, and they said, "What would you advise young people?" And he said, "Get into politics." So that would be my advice to you too. Get into politics. And, the people who win are the people who are there. And it's tough to lose, and I've lost a number of times, and I've won a few times. It's great to win. It's tough to lose, but the more often you run, the more likely you are to win and have an influence on what goes on in society. But remember that politics is about the legislature, and the legislature is about law, and law does not change hearts. Politics does not change the hearts of a nation. People change because they're persuaded of an ideal that's greater than them. And so, when I first became interested in politics, I was in Bible college studying to be a pastor, and I had to decide between being a pastor or going into politics. And I felt that I would be more influential for good if I went into politics. And I wonder in retrospect if that's true. I wonder if I could not have been more influential for good and for God if I were to have been a pastor. You can never know these things. You never really know if you made the right decision, but you live with what you did.
Yeah.
And I tried to be influential for good as much as I could.
Do you think you can be a politician today and also be open about your faith, or do you think you have to keep?
No, I think you need to be open about your faith, and I always was. I always told people exactly where I was from. In my first election in 2012, which I lost, we sent around pamphlets with the thing that I graduated from Bible college, and I told people I'm a federal conservative, and I always told myself that in this riding I had to out-conservative the conservatives. I had to be more conservative than the conservatives so that I would get the conservative vote, because I needed the conservative vote as well as the smaller liberal vote to win. And so so I was very clear about where I came from. But in a caucus, like the BC Liberal Caucus or the BC Conservative Caucus, everybody has to take a little water with their wine. And so people tend to be certain levels of ideology. And this was always true in the Federal Reform Party as well. There were people who wanted to be ideologically pure and people who wanted to win, and you couldn't be both. And so, and when I was a BC Liberal, I supported the carbon tax. I was not a fan of the carbon tax, but I said, that's part of the program. It's not an issue I want to die on, and it's not a moral issue. And so I find that in politics...
You don't think tax is a moral issue? Feels like theft to me. No, I'm just kidding.
When it gets to a point, I think it is theft. Okay. Yeah.
They used to riot at 10%, so now it's at 50%.
Yeah. Well, taxes are bad and everything. Taxes were lower when I was in government. How about that? So
What about the political system as a whole? And the reason I ask about that is when during the last federal election, I asked Mark Stroll to come on the podcast here and be interviewed on him. He's my MP
Yes,
here,
yes.
and he said no because it wasn't allowed from the federal party in Ottawa.
Oh,
And
really?
I'm like, what do you mean? Like, who do you represent? Do you represent me or do you represent Pierre Poilievre?
Yeah.
Right? Like, why can't you speak freely? But they were, very tightly controlled, and
Hmm.
I can understand why in
Yeah.
today's political climate, where like
Hmm.
you'll get absolutely, for lack of better words, on Good Friday crucified
Hmm.
for
Hmm.
saying anything that doesn't
Yeah.
toe the line. But I
Yeah.
think, well, long term, how is that system ever really going to work? People want to know what you believe. Like,
Yes.
I don't care. Like, you're representing me. That's how the
Yes.
system works.
Caucus can be very difficult to deal with. For example, there's a March for Life every May in the legislature in BC, and I'm a pro-lifer, so I wanted to go out and speak to them for 2 minutes, very positive, not condemning anybody or anything like that. And one of Christy Clark's top people came to me and said, "Oh, Laurie, please don't do this." And there were many meetings, and I said, "Look, there are hundreds of thousands of pro-lifers in BC. Why wouldn't you be asking me to do this?
Mm.
So that everybody knows that they have a reason to vote BC Liberal, that there's somebody in the inside who believes as they do. Why wouldn't you?" And it wasn't about politics, it was about ideology. But they wanted to control my speech. But finally, I insisted because we had a policy. You could say what you want as long as you gave notice. And so I went out and spoke 3 or 4 times in a row. And it was never controversial at all. There was never any press story about it or anything
Mm.
like that. But I just let people know what I believed. And so, um, if you press on your beliefs and make your case, you can sometimes get around caucus discipline. But caucus discipline is a very real thing because everything you say impacts every other member of caucus. And people would come to me and say, "Laurie, people are asking me, why do you allow that Throness to speak about pro-life stuff? That's wrong." And so I'm getting flack about that, they would say. So I would say, "Well, thank you for bearing with me. I get flack about stuff that you say too."
Yeah.
And so, yeah,
What do
you
you
live
think?
and die together in a caucus.
Yeah. What do you think about Pierre Poilievre? You think he has a chance in the next federal election?
Oh, it was so stolen from him.
It was, yeah.
I feel so bad about that. I have met Pierre Poilievre because I used to work on the Hill, and he was a very insistent, very strong politician. I would not want to be a bureaucrat on the other side of him, but I would want him to be my MLA or my MP. Like he has a very strong will, and I think that's very key for a prime minister. You have to have a very strong will because the bureaucracy is massive and extremely powerful, and you can be led around the nose by a massive bureaucracy. For instance, in agriculture, when I was with Chuck Straw, there were 14,000 employees. You know, they know all the ropes. They spent their lifetime in the department. If you don't exercise a strong will, you can accomplish nothing. And so Pierre Poilievre has a strong will. And I think that in the future the Conservatives have a huge chance. It's been now 14, 12 years of Liberal government, and we absolutely need a change. I think personally that maybe Trump spoke for Carney because he felt that Poilievre was a tougher opponent.
I mean, I don't know why any other reason besides that, but it was crazy how big the swing was.
Yeah, and driven by baby boomers,
Yeah,
not
that's
by
right.
young
Yeah,
people.
which are mainly watching the news. I found this during COVID when I seen that the older generation, including my parents, were saying things about the restrictions and things that were going on, which just blew me away. And I was like, wait a minute, they don't have Twitter on their phone, they have CBC.
Yes.
And if that's what you're listening to, you're going to be influenced by it.
Yes.
And I think that the baby
Yeah.
boomers are still watching mainstream media, which and most of my peers my age also never watch because it's just useless.
I rarely watch TV at all. Maybe sports.
Yeah.
I watch YouTube for the things I like to see.
Yeah. I did see that Pierre Poilievre recently went on Joe Rogan's podcast, and then
I saw
a
that.
couple days ago again on the Diary of a CEO with
Okay.
Stephen Bartlett, and spoke around 2.5 hours on both those podcasts at length. And Stephen Bartlett actually said he was impressed by the fact that Pierre said there was no topics off limits, and he talked about anything. And I seen after he'd been on Rogan that Christy Clark was on a panel commenting on it and said, when I was in politics, I would never have gone on a podcast for 2 hours and just talked, because you're going to, for sure say something wrong or
Yes.
whatever. And
Yes.
that's kind of how it seems like politics, and at least in politicians in Canada, kind of have operated, and they'll very much curate what they're doing. And so do you think there's a shift in what's going on there, because he didn't go on these podcasts in the last election, and now he seems to be a lot more open to it? And I don't know if he just has less to lose now, or
I think that may be part of it. I think you're more controlled if you're in a very tight race. You're less controlled if you're not in a tight race. And he's not in a tight race right now. If there were an election, it would not go well for the Conservatives, which to me is staggering. I don't understand that with all that's happened.
no, I mean, it can only be the media as an explanation, no? Because with what's happening, I mean, Carney said recently on a pod on somewhere that affordability isn't really an issue. I can't remember the exact words, but I'm like, what?
How could you say that?
Like, have you seen what's gone on the last 12 years?
Yes.
Like, everything has gone backwards. Like,
the media is certainly, and Canada is a small illiberal nation. Okay, it's always the default government and has been for like 100 years. So they come in, they bring in the Conservatives when they're tired of the Liberals, but they vote out the Liberals. They don't vote in the Conservatives. And the media are, they are taught in liberal universities. They grow up in a liberal culture, and so they foster liberalism wherever they go. And so you will not find in BC a Conservative journalist. Maybe there's one in Chilliwack.
well, you won't be a journalist very long.
And you will not be a journalist for very long. Yeah. I always like to think that they hunt in unison. They bay in unison. And if they latch onto somebody as they latched onto me in 2020, you can do no good. You're an evil person, and that's that. And I remember in the election in which Stephen Harper lost, it was a 72-day election period, and I did not see one positive story about Harper in 72 days. And that is incredible, an indoctrination that is beyond belief and very hurtful to the nation. Because if Stephen Harper would have been our prime minister today, we would be flying high.
Yeah, we would be. Yeah.
Things would be fantastic.
Or a lot better, at least.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, you see some of the debates. I've seen some of the debate clips pop up of when he was running for the last time and lost against, who was it, the NDP guy that passed?
Don't ask me names.
Jack Clayton.
Yeah.
Jack Layton, yeah. And Trudeau. And, I think Harper was saying, if these guys get in, they're going to open the borders, and we're going to have 100,000 immigrants. And, and Trudeau says, that's not going to happen. And, look what happened.
During that election, because I knew Stephen Harper from the Hill, he was in a rally in Abbotsford, and I went in the back. I was invited in the back to meet him and just say hello, because we had chatted on different occasions. And I said, I think you're going to win in the election. He says, well, maybe I will or maybe I won't. But if I lose, then I'll be fine. It'll be the country that'll be screwed. And he was absolutely right in what he said.
Yeah.
So it was a great loss to the country.
Any last closing thoughts for the listeners, just in general, regarding the issues of politics and kind of where Canada's headed? Do you feel hopeful? Do you feel, like what advice would you give to the listeners, which I know of my podcast here are mostly conservative?
I would give encouragement to young people to get involved in politics. The political landscape, as I say, is always changing, and it may look difficult and bad today. Tomorrow, it may look very different. Tomorrow, the conversation may change. And in order for you to grasp the opportunity to enhance and impel that change, you need to be there. And if you are there, then you will be able to grasp the tools of change that we have in society. And so I would encourage people to run for small office, for large office, to become a member of a political party and to donate to that party. I'll tell you, as an MLA, to have a member of a political party was gold, because people do not want to become members. If you have a member of a party, that member will be influential far beyond the proportion of their numbers, because people just don't become members anymore. They're not joiners. So if you are a joiner, you are influential from the word go. So I would encourage involvement.
And you would even say that in light of your earlier comment that you're not sure if it was the right decision to go into politics rather than the pastorate?
The Lord knows. I leave it up to the Lord. I did what I felt was the Lord's leading.
Yeah.
And so I have to trust that He's led me and will lead me in the future.
Fair enough. Well, I appreciate you coming on again and taking the time. It was insightful. I enjoyed our chat here, and if anybody is listening, can they reach out to you? What are your future plans?
Sure. Facebook. I'm not sure what to do next. I'm honestly just assessing.
Old Testament?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe. Maybe. Yeah, I'm doing a lot of volunteer work.
Okay.
And so I'll certainly continue that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you very
I
much.
appreciate the opportunity, Kyle. Thanks for having me
You
on.
bet. Guys, if you enjoyed this episode, like, comment, share, subscribe. It's hugely appreciated. And I will catch you on the next one. Peace. Hey guys, if you enjoyed that episode and were blessed by it, would you be willing to support the show? That would help a lot in creating more content, improving the quality of the content, putting the production value, getting more guests on, and me being able to spend more time and energy towards it. So if you're interested in doing that, you can click up here and it'll take you to a support page. But you can also subscribe to the podcast by clicking over here and doing that. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you on the next one.